We're going over to Major General Chip Chapman, former senior British military advisor at the US Central Command. He's in Brittany because, of course, today is the 80th anniversary of D-Day. Rishi Sunak and Keir Starmer and King Charles all over in Normandy right now. Major General Chip, a very good morning to you.
Good morning, Mike.
It's a very interesting day today, isn't it? Because it makes us all remember those times when so many brave young men took their lives in their hands, literally. We were talking yesterday to Simon Diggins and saying, you know, only yesterday people were sitting around waiting to get on boats, waiting to embark, waiting to go to Normandy without really any real knowledge of whether they were going to come back.
Well, that's right, and it's 7:24, I think, over in the UK, and it was 7:25 in 1944 that the British beaches started to land. It was 6:25 on the American beaches because the tide played a big role here, and we've already had the first casualties. The first casualty occurred at something like 0016 on the Pegasus Bridge, one of the key bridges that needed to be taken by the airborne forces to secure the flanks. We're somewhere off Bayeux at the moment. Of course, that shows you the human costs because that's the biggest British cemetery in Normandy, and there are 1,800 on a memorial there who have no known grave.
Yeah, I mean, the day obviously will be one where people remember their lost loved ones, their relatives. We had a guy on just the other day whose uncle was on one of the first landings. He was actually an Australian who died that day, but was rewarded with an honour because he was very, very key in identifying some of the German positions which could then be taken out, because that was also a very key part of the operation, wasn't it?
Yeah, really, there were three things which were fundamentals to success. The first one was the funnies. Those are the things like flail tanks and the DD duplex tanks that had to come ashore because you needed to neutralise the enemy. So the funnies were fundamental. The second one was the flanks, secure the flanks so you couldn't have counterattacks from the German forces. And the third one was firepower. You needed the naval and air bombardment to succeed to enable the foothold to be given on land. Where you didn't have the funnies was where you had real problems. And that was essentially on the American beaches, particularly on Omaha Beach, really captured by the Robert Capa photos, which show you the carnage there. And of course, reinforced by sort of Saving Private Ryan, which is not far from the truth.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I've said this many times this week already, but I'll say it again. I had my two teenage sons watch Saving Private Ryan, and last Easter we went over to Juneau and to Sword and Omaha just to look and walk on the beaches and to see how little has really changed, because the landscape is exactly the same in a way, isn't it, that it always has been.
Yeah, the ground never changes. I mean, really, it's always the relationship between the ground, enemy, time and space, which is the fundamental thing. And of course, they came in at the time they did at 7:25 on the British beaches because they needed to be on a rising tide, but a low tide to begin with, to try and remove the obstacles. And if you got that wrong, then you're in big trouble. The Americans got it wrong for reasons to do with the tide, which was still quite the waves were quite high, 4 to 6 feet high, which is why a lot of the DD tanks sort of sank. So it wasn't a walkover by any means, even though you had that application of firepower. And indeed, at the moment, I mean, at 7:27, as we are now on Omaha Beach, if you didn't get off that beach to the sea wall, you were going to die. And that's why the carnage of Omaha really occurred at the moment that we're talking about.
Yes. And, we've been talking this week as well about, what people know about D-Day and what people know about the commemorations of D-Day. And a lot of young people, it seems, are not as aware perhaps as we would like them to be. What should we do about that?
Well, it's always a process of education and understanding that, all the isms of the 20th century were overcome by military power in the end. So we defeated communism by having a better economy. We defeated authoritarianism, Nazism by having to destroy Hitler. We absolutely need D-Day and the Second World War to be taught in schools so that we don't allow the rise of authoritarian states who can do a similar thing in the future.
Indeed. But in terms of just the detail of the day and of what happened, I mean, even just your explanation of the tactics and how important the tides were and all of those things, it's fascinating stuff. I'm sure that, children of every age would love to hear about it.
That's right. And of course, I'm lecturing here on this cruise ship, Mike, and it's the sort of human details which always interest me. So, for example, the momentous decisions of Eisenhower. Eisenhower was smoking 80 Camel cigarettes a day in the lead up to to D-Day, and that's, at 6 minutes a cigarette, that's 8 hours of continuous puffing.
Right.
You can see the burden of responsibility and decision making on someone like Eisenhower by just that sort of statistic.
Right.
And the other humans, like for example, the oldest guy killed on D-Day was 51. He was a brigadier general. The youngest guy killed in the Normandy campaign was actually 16. He joined the army at 14. He was a paratrooper called Private Bobby Johns.
Incredible stuff. And funnily enough, I mean, you're not in Normandy right now. I'm told there's some kind of transport strike in France, which is typically French on a day like today. I'm also looking at some pictures that have just come into us from Jerome Starkey, the Sun's defence correspondent, which shows British paras who've jumped into Normandy after they've landed, being greeted by French customs, who are asking them to sort of produce their papers, which is a little bit different from 80 years ago.
Yeah, they weren't asked for their passports in 1944. We've just actually seen 4 Hercules aircraft fly down the coast here, so they are active at the moment, just as you're sharing those pictures. That was the jump yesterday, I believe, which is also interesting where it was. I've jumped into the original DZs here. Our anniversary is the 50th anniversary, which is DZ November, which is up in the British sector. Sannerville is actually down towards Omaha Beach, so that really shows, I think, the primacy of the American commemoration, as it were, this year, with most of the parachuting down in the sort of Omaha sector, I think.
Right. And so, I mean, today's commemorations, obviously, lots and lots of dignitaries are there, but also an awful lot of veterans, not as many as last year, I suppose, and probably not as many as the 60th anniversary either. This might be the last time there's a reasonable number of them still able to get to Normandy.
Yeah, I think that's true. There will still be some around, I think, for 10 years, because I went to the final World War One guys at the Cenotaph in 2008, the 90th anniversary, but there were only 3 left. And the Second World War veterans are now sort of falling off the perch at quite a rapid rate. Certainly this year, the last veteran of 7th Parachute Battalion died, the last veteran of 9th Parachute Battalion died. So there are units of which there are no members left anymore. The last member of the Kiefer Commandos, the French who landed here, also died in the last year, age 100. So there are fewer and fewer as we go on.
Exactly right. Well, enjoy the day. Thank you very much indeed for talking to us. Major General Chip Chapman, former senior British military advisor at the US Central Command.